Hey, it's Tammy. Thanks for joining me, and I am here today to challenge some belief systems. And the reason I say that, it was interesting. I had logged into the internet the other day, and one of the reports that it was promoting, to kind of check out, was regarding volcanic activity under the contiguous United States. Now, I'm always fascinated by nature, if you haven't figured that out by now. And if you're new, I'm fascinated by nature. Um, and thanks for being here. That said, I caught my attention. I went to watch it, and the video itself was primarily just volcanic activity. It was the dialogue that really caught my attention, which was about how Mother Nature challenged our school of thought around how our predictions of how this was going to go as far as volcanic activity underground, and potential, like, for instance, Yellowstone Park. So we have, as scientists do, whether you're psychology, sociology, chemistry, it doesn't make any difference. Science is about hypothesizing, predicting, and then setting out to prove it. And some of these things we can't prove until it actually happens, such as volcanic activity. But nonetheless, we develop these theories about how things are going to go, and like I said, as a prediction. And interestingly enough, what they've come to discover is that under New England, it's under New England. And again, this challenged, Mother Nature challenged our school of thought, our belief system at the very basic level. We're talking about introductory geology courses in college. I mean, this is how they were teaching at a certain, teaching about things like this at that level, and it's completely disrupted the educational process. Well, maybe not. Who's to say whether they're going to introduce it into the schools? But this was very interesting news. They probably will. However, that's not the point of this. The point of this is that I want to challenge the belief systems that we've developed around health and wellness. Who knew, right? If you're new, I'm a phytotherapist and aromacologist. I have a background in pharmacology, the science of food. I continually study plant constituents and a mechanism of action on the human genome as it relates to drug development and human health. I am very fascinated by and continue also to study and research neurochemistry. And one of the things that I've been talking about for years, and I'm going to bring it up here, although I did recently do a video about self-soothing, and I really want to dial this in because I feel like it's absolutely necessary. The brain chemistry affects our entire body chemistry. It's all related. There's no separation. And the reason I bring this up is because countless people will say to me, especially those who are living with some sort of autoimmune or degenerative condition, that they just are guessing, well, I just assume that depression goes along with this or it ends up becoming a part of this. And, my own father was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and one of the things my mother said to me not long after that was that he's living with depression. I'm like, well, duh. I mean, I didn't say that to her, but in my own mind, I said that because Parkinson's, low dopamine in the brain, dopamine is related to, mood. So it just got me to thinking. And then I had a client yesterday, or a client's husband I was talking to yesterday, that she's been taking these natural supplements that are filled with herbal stimulants and caffeine, filled with them. And she felt great, not surprisingly, she felt good on it, but her challenge is spasticity, severe spasticity, where she's confined to a wheelchair. She has absolutely no use of her hands, and these stimulants are actually triggering the spasticity. I mean, they're involved. I mean, caffeine has been directly linked to spasticity. Truthfully, I'm a little concerned, but I haven't said anything to her because I don't want to completely just uproot her entire protocol here. So I'm trying to be gentle with this, but at the same time, she takes an awful lot of L-carnitine, and L-carnitine is linked to seizures, and her behavior is very similar to seizures, although it's not mental, it's more of a physical thing. So anyway, that's the side note. However, now that we've taken her off of these, I've told her to stop taking some of these supplements because of the extent of caffeine and herbal, primarily caffeine, to be really honest with you. And it was, but she's now feeling low, feeling depressed, which I'm not surprised. So we started her on the maca root, and we've increased the use of her oils and so forth, so we can actually help regulate that. But that is not surprising. And unfortunately, with the amount of caffeine that she was consuming, knowing that 90% of the population on the planet consumes caffeine at some point or at some level, no matter how much, and caffeine has been linked to, or has been identified rather, as one of the substances that causes changes to the dopaminergic pathway, mesolimbic pathway. So this just got me all thinking, right? Because like I said, I've done a video on self-soothing and self-regulation. And so the point that I want to bring up now and challenge is that addiction, not as we look at it currently as a culture, but addiction in of itself, the addictive, self-regulatory, self-medicating, self-soothing behaviors that we employ are actually necessary. They are a built-in survival mechanism. Yes, there are extremes in that people don't know how to self-regulate, and there are substances involved that perpetuate this, because I want you to keep in mind that nature communicates through chemicals. That's just how nature communicates. And when there's a disruption or there's a shift in the chemistry, it's going to it's a ripple effect. Okay, it's not just one chemical. So if we're talking about Parkinson's and low dopamine, it's not just low dopamine. There's other chemicals involved. If we're talking about schizophrenia with high levels of dopamine in the brain, it's not necessarily the case. I mean, I've actually sat in on some lectures out in Stanford that really hit home on that this is really, schizophrenia is more about amplified. You know, I'm struggling with the right word here. Increased. It's an abundance, basically, of, you know, essentially the body has just, it's keeping all of the chemicals in the brain. Okay, so you've got high levels of schizophrenia. I mean, not schizophrenia. Pardon me. You got higher levels of serotonin, higher levels of dopamine, higher levels of glutamate. I mean, this is all going on, and it's because there's a dysregulation somewhere that's occurred. Now, what really prompted me further was I won't ever show up and talk here without having additional information that I feel is necessary to substantiate what I'm saying, because I just don't want to be I got a mosquito bite. Because I don't want to, and you know when this happened? This actually happened while I was doing yoga today. Yeah. Anyway, I always like to kind of back up what I'm saying. And so, like I said, addiction is essentially, I'm using that word lightly, okay? I'm being really cautious right now because I realize we have a really bad relationship with the word addiction. We see it as a negative. We're not seeing it as a positive, and I get, because we have a lot of evidence of negative behavior associated with addiction. It is damaging. It is harmful. It does destroy lives. It does kill. I mean, don't take me to not know the impact of unsafe addictive behaviors. But this is, again, the reason why I did the last video, because the truth is, it's not about ending an addiction. It's really about transferring that addiction into safer choices. Because the bottom line is that we need to be able to self-regulate. We need to be able to self-soothe. And what's fascinating to me is, like, the opioid receptors, there's evidence of their kind of evolution, you know, their appearance in our time, in the human timeline, to be around 100,000 years ago. That's opioid receptors. Dopamine receptors, and this isn't all of them, but this is along the line of the D1 and then and their the lineage, because there's been alterations. Because the one thing that we've been continuing to identify through the genome is that there are continual changes, and I think that's part of my message. Is I'm really wanting to shift our perspective and realize that this isn't happening just haphazardly. Meaning, we don't just have addiction haphazardly. We just don't have schizophrenia and autism just because the world, nature is defunct and we're all getting screwed. No, these aren't bad things. These are conditions that have evolved as a result of environmental stimulus. In other words, something was going on that created chemical changes within the system that our system evolved. And so when I go back, like I said, the opioid receptors kind of appeared in our timeline as a human being around 100,000 years ago. The dopamine receptors, a segment of the D1 lineage, essentially evolved in the marine, from what I can understand, the marine animals, vertebrates, between 615 and 473 million years ago. It's a long time. And subsequently, there have been adaptations throughout that lineage of that genetic receptor of the dopamine. So there's been variations that have occurred, and it changes depending on the species, because dopamine receptors and dopamine itself is found throughout nature. It's not just in the human being. So again, it evolved as a result of environmental stimulus, and this is actually very fascinating to me. So first, before I go any further, dopamine is, I'm going to have it printed, I wrote it up here, is the fundamental roles include learning, cognition, memory, feeling, sleep, motor control, along with other functions. So that is an important piece right there. So, I mean, motor control, as we know in Parkinson's, cognition, memory, sleep, dopamine is essential for that. Okay. Renal function, cardiovascular function are a couple of other ones. So, and olfaction, sense of smell. Did you know that if you're, actually the sense of smell, and I find that very interesting because people who end up with Parkinson's tend to not have a good sense of smell if they have any at all. And thinking about my father has not been able to smell things for many, many years. We didn't know that. But my original training was actually as an olfactory therapist, because I'm very, very big on the nose. And when I tell people sometimes to actually just put a little bit under their nose, we don't need to take things internally. I realize that, and I'm actually starting my, on Patreon, I've started a group, a site, where a lot of the aromatherapy, essential oil work I'm teaching that at a level that it not currently being taught, and this is just kind of a side note. But the olfactory piece of it is very essential. And the reason I'm bringing that up here is because many people go, we have to take it internally. Olfactory bulb sits right here. That's probably going to be the cover picture that YouTube selects, me grabbing my nose. But the olfactory bulb sits at the top of the nose. It is an extension of the brain. And just, believe it or not, the inhalation stimulates movement, okay, because it actually activates the movement, because you're having to inhale. So there's actually movement of the cilia and whatnot occurring. At the same time, it also helps to regulate dopamine. And dopamine is actually necessary for our sense of smell. And it also helps to regulate. We can actually regulate our dopamine. So again, like I said earlier, it's really, really important to stop saying we need to get rid of addiction. We need to be helping people make safer choices and transfer their addiction, because If dopamine is necessary for these different functions, and we know, number one, it's diminished when in the presence of heavy metals, because why? It's oxidized in order to store heavy metals. That's one of the reasons why. Are we actually naturally low in dopamine? I don't think so. I think the body is overly, there's a I don't want to say overregulation, but there's that's not the right word. There's an overstimulation. Something is happening coming in from the environment. Okay, so I feel like I'm talking fast here, so if I say or if I miss something, please let me know in the comment box below. But I just wanted to say that where I was going with that, I want to go back to what I was saying earlier, which is everything happens for a reason. That the current health conditions that we're seeing are not a sign that the body is defective. It's a sign that the body is reacting to the world around it. It's a result of environmental stimulus. I find that very interesting because when we look at the neurochemistry and brain development, the developing brain from the moment of conception, it's been determined that the brain develops based on environmental stimuli. That is what actually causes the brain to shape itself. And again, to me, this is fascinating because I just got done reading a study on schizophrenia because, again, I am very, very fascinated by mental health. Not because I just find that, ooh, I really want to help get to the root of the issue. And in fact, I'm actually going to do a little segment on my IGTV as soon as I'm done here on what the root of the issue is. And I'll just tell you, the root of the issue has nothing to do with one thing. You know, I know everybody's talking about we're going to get to the root cause. You know, the first thing that comes to mind is Lyme. Well, Lyme is your problem. Lyme caused all this. No, Lyme is one thing. Lyme stimulated the body to do what it's going to do. It altered the chemistry as a result of trying to keep you safe and protected. You may disagree with me because something, you know, an illness arose out of that, but as long as you're alive, your body is functioning. We have to shift our mindset to understand that. And so this disruption in normal, quote unquote, chemical behavior is what ends up leading to oxidative stress, because oxidative stress is produced to protect the body. It creates inflammation as a means of protection. The body has the ability to deactivate that oxidative stress. It's just not happening. So when we transfer our addiction to enter safer choices and we actually stimulate the body to produce more dopamine, we already know that. That's part of the thing with addiction, is that when we get involved with addictive substances, we're actually generating dopamine. We're actually stimulating the production of dopamine. The same thing can be said for exercise. You know, there's a lot of habitual behaviors that we enjoy that are good for us, that are, you know, that are stress relieving, however you want to put it, but they're also encouraging the production of dopamine. This is another reason why I encourage people to put oils under their nose instead of ingesting them. And that was the reason why I said that, because in this course that I'm talking about, I will talk about why it's not, you know, necessary to take them internally through the mouth. There are other ways to take them internally if that is necessary, and sometimes it's warranted. But for the most part, we can start to help regulate physiological function, the body's function, just through olfaction, just through sniffing it. And every time I tell anybody that, they're like, what? And you can actually make a big difference just by sniffing it. So, like I said, if we actually realize that addiction, in my opinion, is a built-in survival mechanism, that, you know, we find these cravings, and again, we've lost control in many, many areas, whether it's with sugar and carbs, and, you know, we have to self-regulate. But what I'm trying to do right now is actually raise awareness. If I do nothing else, I want to raise awareness and cause people to go, Because the thing is we can rein our thoughts in. We have absolutely all control over our thoughts. And if we realize that we're kind of going overboard with something, it takes practice. You know, what my concern is right now is if I say that, well, if you got your head in the refrigerator and you're eating it, eating yourself out of house and home right now, you want to get help, okay? There's a fine line here, and I realize that many people are struggling. And what I'm proposing here is not the be-all, end-all. It's not the quick fix. It's not the miracle cure. We have a number of systems available to us to actually help us get back on track. So again, as I said, this is more about awareness. This is about challenging the school of thought around addiction. It's about challenging our school of thought around autism, schizophrenia. It's about challenging the school of thought around why we're seeing the degeneration of health, and realizing that the body has done nothing but evolve based on external environmental stimulus. That's all it's done. You may not like the way it's evolved, but maybe we should rethink what we're putting out there. Again, if you're new to my video, I've talked about this in other ones. We currently have 45 million chemicals on the planet that are consumed by human beings on a daily basis, whether we're talking about breathing them, drinking them, eating them, putting them on our skin. It doesn't make any difference. We are surrounded by chemicals that are affecting us at the cellular level. You know, tens of thousands of them have already been identified as what they call xenoestrogens. And these xenoestrogens act like estrogen in the body, which will activate the stress response. In fact, when you look up brain development and you read the research, and they can determine that the brain, even in utero, I mean, this isn't to say, again, I'm not slamming anybody. I'm not coming against any parent. I'm a parent myself. And my kids turned out differently each time. My first one, I was incredibly anxious with. Super anxious. And he ended up being extraordinarily anxious. And a number of other things. I mean, they weren't diagnosing autism to the degree then as they are today. But in my belief system, he falls in that spectrum. The point is that the environment has a direct influence. And the reason I say this, and I keep addressing schizophrenia, is because I just got done reading a research paper on schizophrenia. So like I said earlier, I'm not fascinated by it like, ooh, I'm actually very intrigued by the chemistry of it, because we have the ability to regulate our chemistry through thought. We have our ability to regulate our chemistry through behavior. It's really at our fingertips. And again, if we've gone to the extreme and our system is so out of, I don't want to like to use the word, feeling it's so unstable as a result of extreme behavior. We have systems in place, you know, people who can help one another kind of bring it back to center. So with this report I was reading on schizophrenia, one of the things that they talked about in there was an imaging of healthy brain versus one with schizophrenia, that there's a lot. First of all, they're saying that schizophrenia is hereditary. I personally do not believe that any disease is hereditary. If it's a degenerative disease, I do believe that we could, you know, the way that we're wired, I do believe that mental health, you know, that does affect the way the chemistry flows. But in this particular document, they were suggesting that in a schizophrenic brain, that there are, you know, I've seen it with ADHD, I've seen it with autism. You have higher levels of activity in one brain, where in a healthy brain it's not quite so active. In a schizophrenic brain, there's an overdevelopment in one area versus what you would see in a normal or a healthy brain. I don't like to use those terms because in my mind, as long as we're above ground and breathing, we have some degree of health. It may not be the quality that we're looking for. It may not serve in many ways, but we have some degree of health. The point is actually bring stability. So if there's an overdeveloped area of the brain in schizophrenia, and we know that in brain development from the time of conception is completely linked to environmental stimulus, then that says that any degree of stress or mental and emotional, and most importantly, environmental stress, which is all these chemicals, will cause changes within the way the brain develops. So it's no wonder we're seeing more, an increase in schizophrenia. I think I read today there's like over 2 million people currently diagnosed with schizophrenia. We know the numbers are higher for autism. I don't even know the statistics any longer for Parkinson's. And addiction, that's a crazy number right there. I mean, when you've got 12-year-olds being admitted into long-term, not long-term, but, inpatient treatment. So again, the belief systems that I wanted to challenge is that really addiction, or the addictive behavior, or the addictive patterns, or the repetitive habits really are about survival. It's actually about helping to promote the chemicals that we need to survive. And if we actually realize that these dopamine receptors and their lineages evolved over time, depending on what we were being exposed to in the world, that's fascinating. That is so flippin' cool. And like I said, and then we developed the opiate receptors. So again, all of this stuff came into existence through our time here and through what we were exposed to. And of course, we're being exposed to so much these days, especially with the heavy metals. I've already talked about xenoestrogens, but I really feel like heavy metal is a big problem for us. And for a number of reasons that I will not go into here. But there are ways to help support the stimulation. Knowing the amount of heavy metals that we're exposed to on a regular basis, it's no surprise that we're seeing such addictive behaviors coming up. And when I talk about addiction, I'm not even talking about the people who sit around and play video games. And do you know that that's actually been classified now as a mental disorder if you habitually play video games? Yeah, I read that one recently. So anyway, it's no surprise that we're seeing an increase in this kind of habitual behavior because interestingly enough, we are actually self-medicating without even realizing it. So if I can bring awareness to this point of our evolution and our development on this planet and everything that we're being exposed to, all I want to do is lend an explanation so that we can create this platform of understanding and begin to make choices that better serve us and what we're here to do. And if we don't want to, that's fine too. But I suppose that if you're actually watching this, there might be something in this for you. And I think it's really, really important to understand that the development of the brain is directly it reflects directly the environment that it was born into. So that's the immediate household and the world around. And again, this isn't about pointing fingers and placing blame. It's not at all. Because if we don't know this is going on, if we don't really understand this, then it's very difficult to even wrap our heads around something other than, well, we did something wrong. I mean, I can't tell you the number of families that I work with autistic children and the blame, the self-blame. What did I do wrong? I've got, one friend, actually several friends with their mothers to twin autistic children. I mean, both of the twins are autistic, and and the statement to me is, what did I do wrong? Or the question. And all I could reassure them is it's not anything that they did wrong. It is, and then I go on to try to explain what I just did here. So yeah, dopamine has a really significant role. And if it's being diminished as a result of environmental stress, then it makes perfect sense. And if we have too much of it in our brain, there are ways to actually help regulate that and improve the way the body is distributing it. I mean, that's possible too with schizophrenia. I mean, we don't need to be going to such lengths that we do. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say for today. But it is really about, we have these belief systems that we've been schooled in, we continue to talk about, and it seems to be the bandwagon. And all I'm saying is we don't need the damn bandwagon, because the bandwagon is just our mind trying to predict and trying to explain. But Mother Nature is going to challenge this all the time, and she's doing it consistently through the proof. I mean, she's proving herself consistently that all throughout our existence, our bodies have changed. That, if we had the technology to predict, how do I want to say that? If we knew enough back then, millions of years ago, or even hundreds of thousands of years ago, and knew enough to be able to predict how things were going to go, like if we were observing our children or we were observing our culture and we were predicting, would we have predicted this, that what we're going through right now? More than likely not. We would have predicted it based on what we were seeing. The evidence that was in front of us, our speculative thoughts would have hypothesized maybe where this was going to go. But we would never have, thousands of years ago predicted a culture like we have now. Never 1,000 years ago would we have ever predicted the degree of disease that we have. Yes, disease has been part of our existence without question. But I don't think we would have predicted the magnitude. I don't think we would have ever, I know we would never predicted the amount of schizophrenia, addiction, and autism that we see. So the point is that prediction is only good for so much. And a lot of our prediction is based on our understanding of what's in front of us. A lot of these are long shots. And as they've demonstrated with the volcanic activity, Mother Nature completely pulled the rug out from underneath them and said, nope, we're going over here. And she's doing this consistently with us. We have some degree of control. I won't say we won't have any control, but we've got a lot. We're up against a lot with the environmental toxins, or the environmental trauma is what I prefer to say. And our bodies will continue to adapt. Our brains will continue to develop as they are, and more, and even differently as we move forward, until we can get a grip on how to self-regulate in a way, with a mindset that sees the advantage and embraces understanding and stops viewing it as something bad and wrong. If we can really understand what this is all about and stop judging it, we might actually see a better future for not only ourselves, but for our children. Anyway, thanks for watching. Synergessence.com is my website. Tammy@synergessence.com is my email. IG and Twitter, I'm at TammyDavis8, and Patreon is called Synergessence, and I'll put the link in the description box. But I'd love to have you hook up with me somewhere, and let's keep this conversation going. Because it really is about completely shifting the way we view ourselves, we view our communities, and we view the world. Because we're here, we're in this together, and we better stop looking at it through sour eyes. Maybe it's time to not even put rose-colored goggles on, but actually see it for what it is. It's adaptation. It's a flexibility to move the way nature needs to move in order to survive, regardless of our judgment. All right, thanks for watching. I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Bye now.